We ready? Okay, I think we'll get started this evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Lodi Wine Brand Live this evening, and tonight we have a real treat for you. We've got the wines of Mokelumne Glen Vineyard, and my name is Stuart Spencer, and I, among several hats I wear here, is the Program Manager for the Winegrape Commission. I'm also a winemaker here in Lodi, and apparently I'm the Executive Director here now for a while as well. So we're going to have a big dive into Lodi wine tonight. I'm joined on my right here by Brett Koth, whose family owns and farms Mokelumne Glen Vineyards, and on my left by Markus Niggli, who is the winemaker at Borra Vineyards and Markus Wines.
Hi, everybody.
So one of the things that I think is setting Lodi apart is its experimental nature here, and it's kind of something that's existed for a long time, but it's really starting to come to fruition as the rest of the wine world is starting to discover it. Going back in the history, there's always been a profound interest in growing different varieties that the market was interested in. But over the course of the last 20 years or so, there's been a proliferation of kind of unusual varieties, from Spanish and Portuguese to traditional French varieties to Italian to German and Austrian, which brings us here tonight for Mokelumne Glen. And Brett, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family farm?
Okay, as Stuart said, my name is Brett Koth. Excuse me. I am the Vineyard Manager for my family's property, for my vineyard. And a little bit about our history is my parents bought the property in 1962. They were living over in Castro Valley at the time. They moved over here. At the time, there were pears, flame Tokais, and some Zinfandel, small block of Zinfandel on the property. Those were farmed as is for a while. They were both teachers, so they couldn't put much time into it. Otherwise, my dad did some on weekends, stuff like that. My grandfather was also living there, so he did some at the time. They were farmed for a while, and then eventually those came out, and we went to some Chardonnay. A little bit later, a while later, there's some Viognier. Some Zin went in where some Tokais had been, and there were other smaller amounts of other varietals around, and then those were farmed for a while still. Then eventually we went to the German and Austrian grapes, and so the interesting part is, how did we get onto that? It all goes back to a trip my dad took about 1990 to visit my sister, who was over in Germany living there on a Fullbright Scholarship. And they went out to dinner one night, ordered a German Riesling. My dad, being used to the sweet California Rieslings being produced at the time, expected the same from this German wine, and tried one sip with dinner, and changed his whole outlook from there on. He wanted to go explore these German varietals more, grow them, produce them, find out more about them. And so then we have a German collection. It's moved several spots over the years. It's in its permanent home now, and we're at 48 different varietals. I say that because if we count the 8 different clones of Riesling, it would be about 55. But it's actually at 48 of distinct separate varietals, and my dad's always on the search for more.
How big is the property? How many?
26 acres total property, total acreage in it. About 14 is plantable. We'll be within about half an acre of being planted out by the end of this year. There's about 1 acre of Riesling, clone 90. When we finish the planting, we'll have about 4 acres of Kerner, which would be the most of any varietal we have. They're about, right now, about call it 2/3 of an acre of Bacchus. There's an acre and a half of Gewürztraminer. 3/4, well, when some plantings come online, about an acre of Dornfelder, that's a red. Will be about 3/4 of an acre on Zweigelt, and about 3/4 of an acre on Blaufränkisch. And then also I have my own, I bought a small section of the land, of the property, about 1 acre. It was my grandparents' house, the house my dad grew up in. And I will be putting in about half an acre of Brunner Veltliner later this year too.
So everyone's going to be tested on that at the end of the night. You have to name all those varieties in the acres and hopefully pronounce them correctly. So the interesting thing, I think, from my experience with your family, I remember in the 90s when they were doing this, and then they took the path of starting their own winery too, I believe around 1998, 99. And I was around here at that time too, and I remember thinking that his dad was absolutely crazy to be doing all these obscure German varieties in Lodi.
The first time he's heard that.
and trying to make wine and sell them. And I think at the time he was actually a little bit ahead of the curve. Actually, I think he was a fair ways ahead of the curve, because at that point in time there really wasn't the interest in the consumers and sommeliers like there is today with these unusual varieties. And so I know firsthand they struggled with the wine side of it. And tourism in Lodi at that point, when we opened our visitor center in 2000, and there was they started their wines around 98, 99. We had 8 wineries in the area with tasting rooms, and so tourism was pretty much unheard of. You could go a week just sitting there waiting for somebody to show up at your door, and a wine like Zweigelt is, I think, a hand sell, and you're not going to get many retailers willing to put that on the shelf. But they have persevered, and I think the next thing I'd like to do is turn this over to Markus, because I think he's played a key role in helping shine the light on this unusual yet I think incredible vineyard we have going here in Lodi. So Markus.
First, I forgot something. There is about a half-acre block of, that go for the late harvest that we'll be trying later on also. Just to make sure that gets in there.
Oh, well, they'll be tested on it. So Markus,
okay.
Why don't you just quickly introduce yourself and tell us how you came to the Mokelumne Glen Vineyard.
Yeah, so Markus Niggli is my name. I'm from Switzerland, so that's probably my closest connection to all these varietals. Back at home, I worked with these varietals. I drank a lot of these wines, so I had a little bit of understanding, how they should taste and what's the possibilities with these grapes. A lot of nice questions and interesting questions coming up here on the screen. And before they disappear, climate is always the first question they come along. Isn't there really the same climate as back home? Definitely not, but I think some locations we have here are very interesting, where the temperature drop is dramatic, 40, 50 degrees from night to day, and I think that's really the favorite climate these grapes are going for. And it's usually along the Mokelumne Glen River, and you have a vineyard as well a little bit further up, and we see these temperature drops as well. So I knew that some strange whites or some unknown whites actually have a good chance here to grow. And when Brett approached me and said, "Markus, I think we are done. Do you have any interest in these grapes?" I say, "Yeah, give me a ton of each and see what we can do." I think it was never the farming issue. I think it's, as you mentioned before, the market. How do you make wine and then sell it to a non-existing market for these varietals? And I think that was the key to break through, and through label designs and through promotions, and all these wines are hand sales. I mean, whatever you taste tonight, you see them on the shelf. You don't know what they are. That's why you guys are here, I guess, to push us in the right direction and move us forward, that this is a known varietal. And I think Kern is the best example that suddenly the interests are spiking, and I'm happy to be part of all this. I think it's fascinating where we're going, and there's much more crazy things in store, I'm sure, but so we'll take it one step to the other. So
So I'm tired of talking and listening, so I think we need to move on to the wines here and to really talk about the wines, because they can really talk about the place as well. And I think the first one we'll start with tonight is the Uncharted 2015 Bacchus, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
What's your name?
So, Brett, what can you tell us about, this is, the winemaker's Jason Holman, and his brand is Uncharted. Do you know much about them, or what can you tell us about them?
Based in Napa. First, Bacchus is a cross of Riesling and Sylvaner. Then that was crossed with Müller-Thurgau. Holman Cellars, based in Napa. I couldn't tell you a whole lot. One interesting thing is that I'm not sure how long ago, a few years back or so, he was on the third day of taking the bar exam, and right in the middle of that he decided he didn't want to be an attorney, be a lawyer. Not sure if he right then decided to become a winemaker then, but he decided he didn't want to be a lawyer at that time. So.
When Jason dropped this wine off, I know he had said that their brand Uncharted is all about that at Uncharted, and he really tries to seek out the unusual and odd, and makes several barrels from these odd varieties he can find all across California. And I think he stumbled upon you guys in an actual ad in Wine Business.
Yes, he did.
.com and said, that's something I got to go try out. And so, how many vintages has he been producing this wine?
This would be his second one.
Second vintage. There was only 45 cases produced, so you guys are some of the lucky few to get this wine this evening. But Markus, you've worked with this variety. What can you tell us about it from the winemaking side?
Right. Small amounts I worked with on this varietal. Very late ripening. It doesn't taste like nothing before it's actually ripe. It's supposed to be a fairly low acid white grape, but the levels I pick, I'm at 16, 17 bricks. I can brush my teeth with that stuff. So it's perfect for in my case it's the blending component. I don't want to add acid into juice, and so this really stands out, gives me the fresh acidity I'm looking for, and it gives me the boost. Interesting. I really admire Jason to go out and put it on the market and put it out there for people to try, because it is nobody probably can say it right. But it's really one of these tongue breakers where it's really funny to see that just that word itself will make it quite far. The winemaking technique was also interesting when I looked over the paper, that he leave it on the skin for a little while, which is very interesting. Probably a little more complexity, adds a little bit more grip, a little bit more richness to it, and it's a very pleasant wine. But it was for me also the first time to taste Bacchus, 100% Bacchus from over here. I think there is no other place than this to try it. So I think that's killer. I mean, try it all and find out what you like on it. I like the slightly apricot flavor in there, some nutmeg, some bitterness in it from probably the skin contact, but it's overall a very pleasant wine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just guessing by reading the notes too. When I first tasted it, there was kind of a slightly bitter / phenolic element in the finish of the wine that just carried it through, that I think obviously probably comes from the skin contact, but I think it also would make it a good food-friendly wine as well too.
Right. Well, in every quiz you have with your party guests at night, ask them to spell it the right way, and I think he will sort the good and the bad already out pretty early. So there's a question up there.
And I'm having trouble reading tonight, but it says, how do you get the bright acids from a low acid variety? Canopy management or early picking, or what have you seen in that?
Right. I would believe that. I think it's definitely the timing. The timing at 15, 16 bricks, it's great when you even get juice out of it, right? That berry is not very big yet, so the acidity levels are quite high. You don't look for too much flavor at this point, really just how is it coming along, is the fruit clean. over canopy management is definitely also, that slows down the ripening quite a bit. It makes the phenolics come out a little bit different, but I would say just the timing of the picking. It's all nice and great that you can schedule when you pick. In reality is, we have seen a shift in picking on timing. They are fairly consistent, but the reds around them in the normal wine world, they are moving along pretty quickly, and so I start picking reds almost before I pick these whites, so I don't have time to come back. So I need to pick the Kerner and the Riesling and the Gewürz and the Bacchus at the same time, and the majority is Kerner, so I base on when that varietal is ripe, I come in and pick. And if the Bacchus is 15 bricks, well, that's what it is. Because
everything else is 21, 22,
right.
And it's 16. So.
Correct. So that's really the simple fact, and I can coat it quite a bit and say, oh yeah, perfect ripeness. No, because that will be October. So extremely ripeness for full profile is probably more later, September, October, but in reality it's not possible to come back for a couple of bins.
How much, do you have any idea, Brett, on how much of Bacchus is grown in Germany or elsewhere?
Right offhand, I don't know of that. I do know of a little bit up in British Columbia. I've actually had a bottle of it. It was quite good also. It was about a bit different from this, distinctively different, but still good too. From there, I'm afraid I don't really know on the amounts.
I think, one of the questions is the wine has this nice fresh acidity to it too, and they're asking, Lodi's typically warm climate area. I think one of the things to keep in mind too is that this site sits right along the Mokelumne River, and you generally have a little bit lower ground there, and so the temperatures often are cooler along the river, and there's actually been some research done locally here on that, where they've put weather loggers, like 100 of them throughout the district, and measured the temperatures, and the coldest spots were right along the lower ground along the river, and this vineyard sits kind of nestled next to the Mokelumne.
It's kind of split into two different parts. There's a lower basin floodplain right along the river. It does slope up gently to a bluff land, but basically all of the whites are down in that lower area, and from the past we've seen that we used to have Chardonnay up on the bluff and down low, and when it was Chardonnay, the Chardonnay would always up high on the bluff would always be about 2 to 4 bricks farther along, so it was always slower down there in lowland. So yeah, the Bacchus is like all of them are down in a cooler area.
Yeah, and you're not aware of anyone else growing this in California or the U.S.?
Not in California.
Come on, he wouldn't tell you that.
He's cornering the market on Bacchus from a
I'm trying to, but
tell it, right? The one question that came up about the skin contact in whites. I mean, I don't know how in your experience, it's not much seen, right? You want to avoid that as the tannins and the distraction. Yeah,
I mean, my experience, there isn't much done with it because it can it can bring a lot of bitter elements to the wines, and the delicacy and the fruit flavors can be overpowered by that phenolic element.
Correct. But Jason, I think you did it right, and you have the rules, but there's no problem to break them sometimes. So I think it's great. So keep going.
I think this night's tasting is all about breaking rules.
There are no rules here.
Well, the first one, in the 2014, he picked about 23 bricks, and that was higher than he wanted. He was aiming more for about 22. And so I'm not sure, didn't get any numbers from him, but I believe he did reach that this time, and it was picked about 2 weeks earlier in 2015 and 14.
Right. He mentioned up before that he picked it on the moonshine. The question was, a full moon or not? No.
I don't know.
All right.
You're not biodynamic, are you, Brett?
No. No.
Let's leave it at that, right? Okay.
All right. I think we can always come back to that wine if it pops up again, but I think we'll move on to...
full moon, he says.
on to... No mooning.
Okay.
Good job, Jason.
21/7. Okay.
As long as
Good permit.
there's no full moons in here tonight. So we'll move on to Markus's, and it's pronounced Nimmo, right?
Nimmo, yeah, nothing to do with the fish.
Nothing to do
That's
with
not
the
Nimmo.
fish. That's how we make him angry around here.
Right.
We talk about Nimmo.
Right.
So tell us about the wine.
Right, so I get a lot asked about the name and what it has to do with the wine. It's the packaging with the, it shows, one crazy aspect of it's showcasing Perth, Australia, German varietals and made in California. So that doesn't make sense, I understand. But everything has a reason. So the name came actually from my time living and working in Australia and get lost every night on the way home. So I started to write down the first letter of every street I turned, and that was Nimmo, and I was home. And so where that name comes from, and has really nothing to do with the fish. So when we go to the wine, it's all 4 varietals are in there from Brett's place. Interesting, this is now year number 4, 11, 12, 13, 14 with this blend. A few changes. Number 1, it was blended before fermentation. I knew what I want to go after, so everything was picked the same day, pressed separately, blended, and then starting cold ferment at 50 degrees. Takes about 3.5 weeks. Then put on oak. And that's really a concept coming from Switzerland. I've seen that made over there, and it adds the layers into this wine, and it's also very good for another 10 years to go. That's really the idea behind making this complete twist. Interesting how Gewürztraminer act with oak, how Riesling act with oak, because that's really not much seen. We got pretty good feedback from restaurants, and also a lot of sommeliers going after it because it's something else than Sauvignon Blanc, and that's really what, for all the white flights, they're liking it. First time screw cap.
Jeff Kralik wants to know why you kept getting lost.
Well, man, they sit on the right side in the car, so the whole thing is on the left, and then you drive on the left, I was on the right, and I want to see you after 2 days there. It's not that.
You should have seen him after 2 days in Lodi.
Right, but at least you have.
Do we have that picture, Jenny? I'm sorry I interrupted you there.
No problem. I think it's interesting. That wine is constantly interesting. Is now 2014, so it's been a year and a half finished. It's in the bottle for a full year. I held it back a little bit just to really see where it's going, and the oak is not too dominant. I'm very pleased where it's going. So it's constantly interesting.
Yeah, interesting thing for me was that when he first approached me about making this wine, he described the process, and he mentioned he was going to be putting it at oak, and I think my first thought, I don't think I said it out loud or anything, but first thought was, you're going to do what? Put this in oak? And then when I learned about it later, what he was doing, basing it on, and then trying it and everything, I'm on board, definitely on board.
So it's 4 varieties. What does each one kind of bring to the blend?
Here, thank you. So I would say the Kerner is the mouthfeel, has good minerality, good refreshness, the slate characters. The Kerner also has a slight taste like the Riesling, so the Riesling does that. The Gewürztraminer is definitely the aromatic part on it, so it's also interacting the most with the wood. And then the Bacchus really is the statistic and acid source. So that's really just to be added. In Switzerland, they use Riesling, so I'm still waiting for him to grow Riesling, and I think they did.
Got about 6 or 7 vines in
There we go.
the collection, but
so that gives me
we're working on it.
0.2% Riesling coming up soon.
So did you model this after did you have a specific wine you were modeling this after?
There is Landolt wines in Zurich. They have a same concept, not exactly the same, but they're starting with Kerner on oak, but then they use different varietals, which again, one Riesling is a big component to it. And so I just figured out, well, if Kerner is the main thing, let's see what else can go in and see how it goes out. So it's really at 2011 you start and you see, and based on then you make the corrections. The blend itself has never changed too dramatically. The Kerner was always the main component to it.
And it's all native yeast fermented too, as well.
Yeah. So all what comes in is what goes out. So.
And what do you think the native yeast brings to the equation?
A few things. Native yeast learning is that the alcohol, the transformation between the sugar and alcohol is really not where it should be. So it's 21 breaks will bring you far up, quite high up in alcohol, and also the expressions from the vineyard, really from the different grapes, are coming out pretty well. I know you kind of already addressed this, but someone saying, did you think the oak was going to work well with this wine, or were you wondering how it was going to turn out? I think the first 2 years the oak was a little bit stronger. It was not because the new oak. So this is 60% new oak, and I think I pulled this off the oak after 9 months. The first year I had it a full 12 months on there. And I think the oak plays a dominant role, but it's not overpowering. It just gives the special twist.
And the Kerner, Kerner's the dominant wine. What is it about Kerner that you like?
The unknown, I guess. So the unknown. It's interesting when you taste the flavor of the berry. You will never expect what comes out at the end of the fermenting cycle, and I think that's the key. So the berry is very dull, has nothing special in there, no special flavor profile. You turn over to the Gewürztraminer and like, wow. So I think that's the biggest transformation. But the mouthfeel, just the complexity in what comes out of the final product, it's pretty stunning, right? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
What about growing it, Brett? Can you tell me what is it like to farm? Easy,
fairly easy. Low to moderate susceptibility to mildew. Pretty consistent otherwise.
Was it ripen early, late, mid?
Earlier than Bacchus.
Right.
But
we usually start big reds. We're at Borra Vineyards. We start big reds last week of September into October. When he came along and said, "Well, you have to be ready by the second week of August," and I said, "No." He said, "Yeah." So that was definitely a change or a challenge, because I just bottled 2-3 days prior, and the good thing back then was that everything was fermented dry and ready to put away before the reds actually came in. And now it's messing everything up, but it's worth. So now the headache is worth the work.
So there's some questions coming out from Philadelphia that may not have listened very closely earlier. That about the varietal blend is staying fairly set now.
Right. It was always in the higher parts of Kerner, no matter what. It's also what is the most what I had available to work with, but I think the Kerner has to be the base. As the structure, as the walls of a building, so it will never go dramatically down or up.
And then you're also making several other wines from this vineyard too.
Right. I tried to make a Gewürztraminer, but last year I didn't get too many grapes out of that one. And I had a standalone Riesling, and then I have that unoaked version of the Nativo, where it's Kerner and Riesling blended together as a stainless steel. Goes very well.
Yeah, in 2015 we had a hailstorm come through early April, and the whites were anywhere from down from 50 to, Gewürztraminer was like 95% off, so we took a real hit from that.
Yeah, that was a freakish hailstorm that came through Lodi.
It was.
last April, and one vineyard would be devastated, and the one next door was just completely fine. One of the other questions I see keep popping up here, Markus, is on your label. Can you tell us a little bit about the label and how that kind of came to be?
So these are done, this last label here was done by Michael Leonard. He is the art teacher down in Stockton at the University of Pacific. The first two labels, the Nativo and also the Nuvola, they were designed by students from his art as a semester project, and I went to them and told them to be different, to be contemporary, to be European, and don't ask more questions. And so based on the information I got them, they had to figure something out. And as, let's say, in the Nuvola, the Gewürztraminer, which symbols a cloud, for maybe there's some left, I'm completely sold out. They all turned on the computer, put out the laptop, and started the Apple program. And I said, no, that's not what I want. So there was that one girl who actually started drawing. And I was shocked. And she was so far away at the first sketch, but she came so close at the second and the third that that was the choice. So the only hand-drawn label, that was the Gewürztraminer. This one here was done by Michael Leonard, yes, as the abstract art. I think the art is all through these lines, but also through he has designed some Borra labels as well. So it's the abstract contemporary, and it's a very typical house facade in Perth, Australia. Sunny place where you want to be.
Where you got lost.
Right. Yeah. Perth is interesting. So you have a nice European downtown, but you go 45 minutes outside of town, there's just dirt.
One of the other questions that came up, Brett, that I think is definitely worth elaborating on, who else is buying grapes and making wines from this vineyard? What other producers?
Well, locally, I have Markus Wine Company, M2 with a late harvest. We have Holman Cellars based in Napa. Hatton Daniels is based in Santa Rosa. He actually will split he makes a Zweigelt and a Blaufränkisch both. He's partnered with another winery. They actually split the two wines. They will be making the Dornfelder this year, and we also sell to David Ramey over in Healdsburg, Sonoma County.
And doesn't Matthew Rourke do something?
And then Matthew Rourke with Forlorn Hope up in Calaveras County.
And he takes the experimental blocks.
He takes the white grapes from the collection and makes a blend called Gemischtes Satz.
And so, just elaborating a little bit on your two. So you have your Kerner blocks, your bigger blocks of more production wines or vines, and then you've got your experimental blocks, which are like 3 vines.
6 or 7 vines.
6 or 7 vines
of 48
different
types. Yeah.
Yes. And so those are all basically picked at once and made into one blended
Yeah, he
wine.
picks them all at the same time. I'm not sure his protocols from there, but yeah, they're all on the same day. They all go into the same bins and
make the same wine, yeah.
Go in right in.
So is there a red and a white being done for that, or is it all reds and whites blended together?
He's just doing a white. Actually, last year, Jason did do a red field blend based with the reds that were in the German collection. And so that'll be interesting to see what that comes out to. So,
I had another question that just escaped me. What from the varietal block has you most, or experimental block has you most excited?
For me, late last year, there were a little second crop left on one of the Riesling clones called 21B. I tried it, and just a little bunch, and I didn't take any measurements or anything. Just tried it, tasted it, and thought, wow, I'm pretty sure the bricks must be up pretty, 22 or something like that. And this is tasting good. Got some real good acid to it, and it's real clean and very aromatic, and that's kind of interesting. And we've actually made on a home trial basis using a German red called Regent, and now we're actually planting about 1/4 of an acre of that.
Of
that has
Regent.
Regent, R-E-G-E-N-T. So that has us pretty excited too. We're looking at so.
I've never heard of that
Do
one.
you see that he never pronounces the varietals because it breaks his tongue? So, and again, yeah, good luck on that marketing.
Yeah, we've got a few other questions. I mean, Amy's wondering what you would pair with your 14 Nimmo.
I saw some very good recommendations up there. Salad, a spicy Asian food, but also anything on a barbecue. You can always go with chicken. I think the oak gives it enough body and weight that you can compare with even some dishes with sauces going on. It's probably not the perfect steak wine, but for anything on the refreshing side, I think it will work pretty well.
Jeff's asking if we're all going to be here for the Wine Bloggers Conference in
Yes.
August, and I'm going to tie this into another question about previous vintages. I think we will be picking grapes by mid-August this year, so I think for those of us involved in the production side of grapes and wine, we definitely need to be in Lodi during the Wine Bloggers Conference, and we'll all have a role in that too. So. The other question was about the last couple of vintages. How have they been here in Lodi?
Yes. Well, your wines, your grapes are actually fairly consistent. I've seen Syrah picking in 2010-11, third week of October, and 2015 was picked on August 8th. So we see that extreme move forward to earlier dates, and winters are definitely not as cold anymore. There's no frost here, or not too many days with frost, and so therefore they push out much earlier, and the ripeness levels are much earlier achieved than we used to see it. So overall, it's probably a 6 to 7 week of hang time missing.
Yeah, I mean what I've seen the last 2 years, in particular 14 and 15, is that we've had these warm springs, or kind of these idyllic springs, and so you're having an earlier bud break of about 2 weeks, and then you're getting a lot of rapid development in the spring, and so you're starting the whole process earlier. And consequently, I think we had some of the whites coming on steam the end of July last year.
Right.
And we all thought 14 was really early, and then 15 came along, and it was even earlier than that. So, and I think this year is shaping up to be an early year again, too.
Right. 14 we saw the bricks coming really fast, but then it plateaued out. It wouldn't move for 6 weeks. 15, as Stuart said, really it was an early start to finish. This year we have much more rain, so flowering isn't full stage right now. So if we have rain the next few days, that's not too much of good news. So we'll see. It's definitely, every year is challenging, and I think it's getting harder and harder to compare these previous years with each other, because always something is different every year. But it's not, I don't believe it's going any further back into September, October anymore. I think we are where we're at early picking, or even earlier, if not something dramatic happens in the winter. But otherwise than that, with these temperatures, I mean, never use long pants anymore. Can flip-flops here all day. That's amazing.
One of the other questions that came up on the Nimmo, and then we'll move on to our next wine, is what does air do to the wine, after it's been decanted or left open for a day or something like that?
I would say that you get the oak will definitely pop out a little bit more in the glass once it's open.
Does it ever last that long though?
It does.
Okay.
I encourage people to take it over 2-3 days and see how it develops, because I think it gets better over time, because I think it's not at the peak at all, and so it showcases really where it can go. Decanting, I think, is not necessary in this white here. It's not closed up at all. It has had its life shell in the bottle already, and so therefore I think it's good to go right out of the bottle. into the glass. But definitely, with warming up, the expressions of these fruits are really getting intense and pushing.
So let's move on to our third wine of the evening, which is the Hatton Daniels 2015 Zweigelt. And they made 72 cases of this wine, so you're one of the lucky ones again to taste this. And Brett, what can you tell us about Zweigelt as a grape variety?
Crossing of Blaufränkisch and Saint Laurent, Austrian varieties. What else? It's easy, pretty easy to grow.
When does it ripen up? When was this picked? Do you remember?
This one was picked okay, in 2015. I want to say something like August 7th, 8th, about that. Yeah,
7th, yeah.
So
You walk through the vineyards and you really, it's the first one who, has flavor in the grapes.
It's in
good color, right?
It's in full bloom right now.
Right.
And so it's a very, very early one.
It doesn't seem to be lacking in color either.
No, it's got a good color too. Very good color.
The majority of the Zweigelt is really grown in Austria, but there's also in the warmer parts in Germany, in the Franken area,
Southern
valley, where you have some Zweigelt popping up here and there, but it's definitely the Austrian grape. Interesting is the early pick, yes. Also, no sulfur.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's sleepless nights. But early pick means higher acidity, so therefore the pH should be fairly low. Therefore, sulfur is not really the key on all this. For me, when I smell this, it comes along with a little bit typical, almost like a Pinot Noir nose to start out with, and then it's pretty pure and clean. So a very typical Zweigelt wine. I had a few Zweigelt back in my Swiss time, but not that memorable. So I have a friend from Switzerland here actually, and he imports wine, and we tasted it yesterday and went through this, and he says there's nothing wrong with this. This is actually pretty good. Just completely unexpected over here. So I think that's the fun part. That again, somebody really has has the intention to get this out and put it on the market. I think great.
Do you know how it's used typically in Austria?
Well, it is seen a lot as a aperitif wine, where it's slightly chilled, served. It's light, it's refreshing. The acidity is high, lower alcohol. So that's the purpose of this wine. Of course, also goes a little bit with food, but with the lighter version, if the food is too heavy or too dominant, then it goes in the background. So it's mainly served by itself.
And typically as a varietal too?
Yes, as a varietal, yes.
I know their notes say here it's typifies the idea of a Glau wine, which is meant for drinking in large, glorious quantities.
Blau wine?
Glau.
Oh, Glau.
Glau
wine. I don't know what Glau wine means, so I have never.
It says drink it in large quantities, so
get drunk.
But 11.9%
Right.
alcohol, I think you can carry a few glasses. So
right. I think it's interesting. It's refreshing, solid color. It's getting more and more interesting in the glass as you play with the glass. The aromatics are really coming up, and the typical, Blauburgunder direction, where the fruit is just slowly approaching, but it's solid. It's the middle palate is good, the aftertaste is long, and the acidity is pretty high. So it keeps in the perfect refreshing. So put this on ice cubes. I mean, not outside the glass. Make it chill, and I think you'll be pretty happy what you get.
Yeah, the thing that really kind of struck me by it. But in initial, and this was the first time I tasted it just before we started tonight, was there was just an earthiness to this wine, in a good way, In
a dirtiness, yeah.
Yeah, right. Just kind of you can almost taste the earth in the wine, and
berry and earthy both. Yeah,
right. I wouldn't agree on the sulfur, but that's his call. And, that's great, but I like to sleep. I like to sleep, and you can do it at very low levels, but some sulfur is really helping.
Jeff Kralick's asking, Brett, what varieties are you seeing the greatest interest in, and what are you seeing the least interest in?
Most interest, probably Kerner. Least, let's see. We sell the Riesling to Markus here. Otherwise we don't really have any more call for it.
I think one of the interesting things I think with regards to you guys is that you struggled on selling the wines because you were ahead of the time, and then after you stopped producing wines, you guys were struggling selling the grapes, and then combination of things with Markus came along, started showing what could be done here, and all of a sudden there's this blossoming of interest in it, and people are kind of coming out of the woodworks looking for these unusual varieties. And I think, like the Kerner, I think you could probably quadruple your production and still
something probably
still have people looking for it.
It's all about creating that market. I think the whites, it's unexpected to see this stuff from Lodi. That's definitely, I think an exciting an exciting point on this. It's also the change, the climate change. Our whites syrah go really well from here. So we never were a white region. We're always red wine. We're always in. We're capitals in. We're the Syrah. We have the big heavy reds. But suddenly the whites are popping, and suddenly the acidity is there when we pick, and the ripeness is there, and so the whole thing is changing. So I mean, good luck on Zweigelt and Dornfelder again to create that red wine market for that. But I think nothing is impossible, and I admire people who really go out with this and push it out the door, because I think it's interesting, and if you guys out there really take it up and promote it, I think there is a market for it.
Yeah, these guys are doing it. So
yeah, and there's people looking for interesting things all the time and creating markets for it with their customer base. Jeff asked, what would I do if I wanted to make a wine from this vineyard? Granted, I make plenty of other unusual things, but one thing that I remember that struck me was when you guys were making your wines yourself, and you did a Dornfelder, and I was at some tasting kind of walking through, I said, let me taste this. I hadn't tried it before, and it just kind of jumped out at me, and it just had this really beautiful fruit character to it that I thought was very pretty, and that might be something I try, although I do think Markus's whites are very delicious, so very refreshing, and around here in the summer, those refreshing higher acid whites I think go really well and lend itself well to our lifestyle here during the warmer summer months.
If you like this color, you got to try Dornfelder.
Right. See, yeah, I mean, again, I mentioned that before. I'm very happy to be part of this changing culture here and pushing the unknown out. And as
So one of the other questions is, and this is kind of the one that always comes up with this, is Lodi's warm. These grapes were developed in cool regions. So why are these working here? And I mean, to me, I think the answer is several things. One, Lodi and oftentimes is cooler than people really recognize. And when you get out here in the vineyards, you tend to notice that our proximity to the delta really creates a distinct cooling effect, a moderating effect too. And to me, we don't see as high a highs and sometimes not even as low a lows as you'll see in like some of the foothill vineyards or even in some of the coastal vineyards. And so how does that manifest itself in the wines? I think it really presents itself as some beautiful fruit. The other thing I would say is, while these wines may originate in cool climates, it's not to say they won't grow here, and it's not to say they won't make interesting wines. They just may be different than where they come from. It just means that, but they could still be good and interesting and unusual. So how do you answer that, Markus?
Well, Lodi is warm, yes, or hot. Go figure that one out, what is what. But in general, if the grape, if it's 95 or 100 degrees, I think it doesn't matter. The grape is shutting down. The grapevine is shutting down as protection, so not to overheat and stress out. So they will shut down the production of the sugar. And so that doesn't really matter. But if the temperature drops down to 45 degrees or 50 degrees in the vineyards overnight, that's really the relief these grapes are looking for. And I think that's what works here, and I think that's why this is possible to move forward with these strange varietals and these unknown in these warm climates. So it's really the temperature fluctuation in between day and night that's the key in all this.
So before we run out of time, we need to move on to our last wine of the evening, which is the M2, essentially late harvest. I'm going to block you here. Late harvest, which is a blend of, Brett, do you know that blend? It's Riesling, Gewurz, Weißburgunder. I think it says on the bottle here.
Rieslander, Gewürztraminer, Weißburgunder. There actually was some Riesling put into this one also. I don't believe he intends to do that otherwise usually.
Well, nothing's usual about Lane at M2 wines.
Well, yeah, I'll second that motion. But
right. So I quizzed him before I got on this evening, and they were all picked at the same time and direct a whole cluster pressed. They were 41 bricks at harvest, and it finished up with about 13.3% alcohol, and the fermentation petered out with about 9% RS, I think, 9.4% RS.
I made the sweet wine out of these grapes in 2012, and I'm sure Lane is on board with this, that you start fermentation and then eventually when you think the mouthfeel and the flavor profile is right, you stop it. And in the fortified world, you add usually some spirits back to it, and you kill the fermentation that way. In this part, you really have to either filter acid to it, and then work with temperatures, really low temperatures, to stop the fermentation, and that's really just is a headache. And I'm pretty sure these are very small volumes, and to keep it cold and really keep it under control, I think that's the headache these wines are creating. But what you get out of it is really that it is sweet with a good fresh acidity and not pungent alcohol. Mm-hmm. And that's a nice combination. And I'm sure if he puts this somewhere, hides it somewhere, this in 10 years or 15 years is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
so don't sell it yet.
Knowing Lane, it won't sit.
No, but keep 10 cases behind and see what it does. The 12 is showing great. I'm sure he goes forward with that. No fortification, see? So nothing has been added, correct? So otherwise the alcohol will be much higher. But I see that as it goes along, that the fruit really pushes. It's nice. It's nice and refreshing, actually, almost on the sweet side.
Is anyone else making sweet wines out of these, Brett, that you know of from your vineyards?
No, I know. So.
No, as a concept, take it or leave it. Yeah. So one gets everything, and the rest is gone.
Are you continuing with the sweet wine at all, Markus? Or is it kind of we'll see?
Well, it is. We'll see. I know the demand is really coming up for sweet wines. When you make that call to I do it this year and I will see you next year. If you're not really on it, January 1st, the stuff is gone. And what's next? So I'm not a big fan of sweet whites from here if the location of the vineyard is not perfect. And so because you have to tweak and twist too much within the wine making, and I don't like that. So what I liked in this project really that they were, it's a good location and everything, works fine. But other than that, it's a giant headache. And I'm sure I can make port, but you already make port, so why competing? But I know there is the market, and it wasn't my last time I did sweet, but it's definitely not 2016.
Yeah, it's definitely something you have to be committed to. And I think it's a delicious wine, and I think it has the acidity here that carries it, because oftentimes some of these sweet whites in California, and there's a lot of wineries that do them because the tasting rooms ask for them can get too kind of syrupy and cloey and viscous, and I think there's still a nice refreshing quality to this.
Yeah, so that's natural, that's not sweetened, and that's, I think, the key, that there's a difference between stopping the fermentation at its natural level or adding back in some concentrate or whatever, however you sweeten your wine. You can taste it, and you really can taste the difference. And so this one here is stopped at the right moment and just left it there.
And you have any suggestions on what you'd pair with this, food-wise?
Stinky cheese, nuts, apricots, anything. I think the acid is strong enough to cut through these cheeses in general. So it's a perfect dessert wine. But you can also go, why not spiciness? You can go with some shrimp and on a salad and see where it goes. I think it's a very good experimental wine to work with.
Yeah, I would agree. I think someone else was advocating for gorgonzola a little bit ago in the stinky cheese column. So, do you guys, Brett, you want to have any last thoughts? So, other than, what is it, Rheingold, Rheinstein, Ronstad? What's the new variety?
Regent.
Yeah.
It's not a destination.
You were close.
Regent. So when are we going to see the first Regent wines hitting the market?
Let's see, 2016, so 2019 then maybe, something like that.
So they're being planted this year, huh?
Yeah. Yep.
What about with Markus? What's new on your horizon?
Oh, what's new? I experimented with some Torontes this year and Traminet from the East Coast. So Torontes was from here, Traminet East Coast, blended together. Very interesting project. Other than that, establish these 4 wines first, see how the market takes it. If it tanks, I'll bury it and then move on to something new. It takes about 2-3 years to really find out am I on the right way, on the right track or not. And the experimental phase is definitely not over. I usually get approached very late in the game and, hey, do you want something? Or do you have some room for something? And it really depends on the picking season and how everything lines up, what's coming out. But I'm positive. I mean, I'm happy that there's a lot of crazy stuff here. Just never give up and keep trying.
Are you reading the board up there?
What is Torontes.
And
One more disco
one
move
more
for the
disco
road.
move.
Not tonight.
Brett's famous for.
I'll never live that one down.
No. If anyone's wondering what we're talking about, I think our Philadelphia friend maybe posted a picture this evening.
I'm sure he has.
But I think we are running to the end of our evening here, and I would really like to commend Brett and his family. They have taken a huge risk in what they've done, and it takes crazy people to a certain extent to do what you guys are doing, and it's helping put Lodi on the map and showing that interesting things can be done and makes wine fun and interesting. And I'd like to thank Markus also for joining us this evening, because he's kind of embraced that spirit here and brought a new face and flavor to Lodi that is helping move us in new directions and outward. I'd also like to thank Charles Com, Kimberly and Alex for helping arrange for all of you and getting the wines to you, and Jenny for doing all the backhanded work down behind the scenes here, and unfortunately Carmen wasn't here to make fun of this evening, but he may have been lurking out there for a bit. So we miss him. I want to thank you all again for joining us this evening, and if you have any other questions, don't feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to answer them. But these were some very unusual and interesting wines this evening, and it's just scratching the surface of what's going on here at Mokelumne Glen and Markus and in Lodi in general. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you soon.
Latest in August.
Yes, August for wine bloggers. So thanks, everybody.